Welcome to the Importance of Citing Evidence, a simple guide for serious historians. All right, so in this PowerPoint presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about why you need to cite your evidence in the papers that you write for this class. Well, the first thing to realize is that historical essays are typically argument evidence driven. So you're not simply writing an opinion piece, but you're writing a fact-based interpretation of a historical problem. And citations, so footnotes or other citations, show the source from which you obtained your facts or your information. Your reader might want to verify your evidence in order to evaluate your argument, to make sure that it makes sense, to make sure that your argument is well supported. And citations also acknowledge the use of ideas or concepts that are not your own ideas. So you're giving credit where credit is due. And you're also protecting yourself against charges of plagiarism. So this is a way of ensuring that I know, as your professor, where your ideas are coming from, where your evidence is coming from. You're giving credit to those ideas and evidence that you're using to build your argument in your paper. So when should you cite evidence? That's the next question. Well, of course, all direct quotations should be footnoted. So anytime that you're directly quoting from a source, either a primary or a secondary source, you should make sure to include a footnote referring back to that source. And this is also true for all paraphrase quotations. So even if you're putting a quotation into your own words, you should still go ahead and cite that evidence in your footnotes. Now, controversial facts or opinions that you borrow from somebody else's writing or even from a primary source, you should also go ahead and footnote that information. Now, you don't have to give a footnote for a well-known date. So everybody knows that the American Civil War started in 1861, for example. That's a well-known common knowledge fact. And so you don't have to provide a footnote for that. You should, however, provide a footnote for a particular interpretation of an event or an action, something that's maybe more controversial or debated by historians or by others. So in a paper about the Civil War, for example, if you were to write that Mississippi seceded from the Union primarily to defend the institution of slavery, you should go ahead and cite your source for that. And in this particular case, that source could be a declaration of the immediate causes which induce and justify the secession of Mississippi from the Federal Union, which you can find on the Mississippi Department of Archives and History website. Now, how often should you go ahead and cite that evidence? So every time you include information or an idea from another source, or even from another page within the book that you're using, you should go ahead and cite your evidence. Now, this may mean that you have 3 or 4 footnotes per paragraph, so it can feel like a lot. It can feel like you've got all these footnotes everywhere in your paper, but that's okay. I would rather see you overcite than undercite. I want to see that you're using evidence to support your argument. I want this to be really clear in your paper. Okay, so how do you cite your evidence? Well, in history, we typically use footnotes. And footnotes are great because they allow your reader to easily look to the bottom of the page to see where your evidence is coming from. So the footnote number in superscript should be placed at the end of the sentence or the quotation that you're using. And then this number will correspond to the same number at the bottom of the page where you'll go ahead and include your citation information. And this makes it really easy for the reader as they're reading through your paper to match that superscript number down to the bottom of the page and know exactly where your information is coming from. Now, footnotes are really easy to use with the word processor. So Word document, for example, you simply go to the References tab and then you click on Insert Footnote, and this will automatically create your footnote. And then all you have to do is go ahead and fill in the citation information. So a really simple way of doing this. Okay, so in history, we typically use Chicago-style footnotes. So this is just a format that we use in history as opposed to various other citation styles that are used more commonly in other disciplines. So just make sure that you're following Chicago-style formatting guidelines. There's there's a lot of stuff you can find on the web about this, but this will just give you a brief guide here as well. So in your first citation, your first footnote citation, you would include the author's name, so their first name and their last name, a comma, and then the title of the book, and then if the book has a subtitle, the subtitle of the book, and then you'll do parentheses, and in the parentheses you'll put the location of publication, and then you'll put the publisher name, comma, and then the date of publication. You close the parentheses, and then you'll have a comma, and then the page number that the information is coming from. So next time you cite the same source in the same paper, you can go ahead and shorten that citation. So you don't have to give the full citation every single time you cite that source. You can then shorten the citation for subsequent citations. And so in this case, that would just be the author's last name, the title of the book. You don't have to give the subtitle in the shortened citation, just the title, and then comma and the page number. Now, if you want to be really fancy and you're using the same source multiple times in a row, you can just use the term IBID, which is short for the Latin word ibidium, which means in the same place. So it's essentially referring to the footnote just directly above it. So if you're citing the same source over and over and over again, and you don't want to use that shortened citation, you could just go ahead and use this IBID, and that just refers back to the previous citation. But you should also include a page number if you change pages. Okay, so if you want to go ahead and use information from my lectures in your papers, you can also cite that as well. And so you do this just by writing my name in the footnotes, first name, last name, comma, the title of the lecture, and then in parentheses the module and the module number, the lecture number. And then you can go ahead and do a shortened citation later on in the paper, or if you're using the same lecture multiple times in a row, again, you could use that IBID term as well. So in addition to the footnotes, you should also include a bibliography at the end of your paper. The bibliographical citation is slightly different from the footnote citation. So if you look at the format and you'll see that it's a little bit different. So in the bibliography, we put the author's last name first, then comma, then first name, then period, and then the title and the subtitle, period, and then the location of publication, the publisher, comma, and the date of publication. So pay close attention to punctuation. It's going to look a little bit different in the footnotes from what it looks in the bibliography. So just pay very close attention to that. All right, so if you have any questions as you're writing your paper, if you have concerns about how to properly format citations, please go ahead and send me an email. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm happy to look at draft papers to see if your citation format looks correct. So do take advantage of that, and also take advantage of the many resources on the web where you can find more information about Chicago-style footnotes. All right, well, good luck with your papers.